Welcome to this week's edition of the Construction CPA's Coffee Cafe. I am the Construction CPA, Lisa Raish. We are dropping the hammer on cash flow problems so you can build things that matter. This week's topic, we're going to be talking about change orders. Let's do change orders without chaos. We're going to streamline it for faster payments because that's what it's all about. You want to get paid fast in construction, which historically has a problem getting paid quickly. So let's talk about change orders today. So really what we want to talk about, this is going to be for the business owners. This is going to be for even project managers who are actually managing the budget on these projects. And let's help you kind of streamline your change order process because a lot of times there isn't a great process around that function. So we want to help you get paid faster, get approvals faster from your customer, avoid disputes with the customer, and then again get paid quicker. So what are we gonna talk about? So how do we want to be able to document and approve those change orders, right? Because that's really I think is the most important part of the function. If you don't have a good process around this function of your business, it is going to be very hard for you to get those change orders approved and therefore, again, not have any challenges with the client and then get paid on time. So, let's talk a little bit about, documenting the change orders quickly. So there's going to be a cost, there's a cost of delay if you take too long on these things. There are things that you're going to want to include in your change orders to ensure that they actually do get approved. And then we're going to talk a little bit about best practices to, in fact, get those change orders approved. So let's talk about the cost of a delay, right? If you have no documentation or delayed documentation or half the documentation, you're going to have delayed payment. You're going to have a delayed approval from the client. You may even have a dispute from the client and therefore delayed payment, right? So it's going to cost you money if you do not have good documentation to support the change orders and the requests that you have. If you miss a change order, right, that could actually be lost revenue to you, which in some cases could be even worse than not having documentation and submitting it lately and getting paid late, actually missing revenue or getting to the end of a project and realize that you missed a change order maybe earlier on in a project and now you've lost out on that cash flow and that revenue from the beginning of the project. So again, there are costs and to delaying this that can ultimately affect overall your cash flow as well as your revenue. Now, what did you want to include in your change order? It's as common as what you're going to have in your actual your proposals, your bids, your quotes, right? You want a description of the change. What exactly are you doing? This is an area where you want to be very clear about what it is that you are in fact doing so that there's no confusion from the client about what it is that you're actually making a change. And in many cases, it's something they've wanted to change, but you have to be very clear on what that is. So just submitting a change order to the client that just says change order 3, something like that, without actual real description of what it is different than you had from your original quote in your bid, you want to be very clear on that. You want to also be clear to the client on any impacts to cost, to your schedule of your project, and just the overall scope of the project. So, client may have requested a change order, or there may be a change that has come through, but you need to be very clear on what that means to your project. It's going to add X dollars. It's going to add X weeks to the project. It means that our scope was here and now our scope is out here. So again, it really you want to be very clear in your change orders about what it is you're doing and how it's going to impact ultimately their project so that the client is very aware. It's really about communication. There's a very large portion of your change order that is actually going to be communication with the client and conveying exactly what it is that you do. In many cases, not just with the change orders, but when you're creating your bids, your proposals, your quotes for your clients, if you aren't clear on what exactly it is you're going to do for them, the cost to do this thing, the schedule to do it, so on. Again, if you weren't clear at that point, if you're not clear with the change orders, now it just becomes even muddier. And now really no one knows exactly what it is you're doing. So you want to be very clear with your client. And then the last thing is you always want some type of client approval. The best is to have some sort of signature and date on it so that there is no confusion that the client did in fact sign off on it because they actually signed it. We see too often where sometimes it's a verbal change order, and there really isn't proper documentation that is followed up with that. And when you have situations like that, that's where you may potentially find yourself in a situation where you have a customer dispute where the customer is, doesn't remember verbally approving that change order and so on. So again, documentation, some sort of printed electronic documentation, and some sort of signature and date from the client. Again, can all be electronic signatures and dates, but a clear path of documentation, something that you can in fact hand back to the client in some way and say, hey, this is exactly what we said we were going to do, how long it was going to take, and you had approved it. So a little bit about best practices when it comes to your change orders. You want to make sure you have a standard change order. Make sure it is a standard form. You go back to the same form every time. You don't want to recreate the wheel when it comes to things like that. So again, in many cases, you want it to look like your original quote or your bid that walks through what you're doing and the costs associated and the timeline and so on. So again, it's clear you're showing consistency to that client, with throughout the entire project, not just on the front end. You're just showing them that you now have a standard form. This is what you're going to see when you get a change order so that you can clearly review it and then ultimately approve it, so that the project can continue to move forward. It also requires that in many cases, the field staff or your project manager or whomever is on site to be able to report changes immediately. So that needs to be able to be reported up to the office, to the owner, to the admin who's actually handling that aspect of it, who may in fact be the one who's creating the physical change order that is going off to the client to be signed off on. So you don't want the field team to be off doing these changes before this documentation has even been presented to the client. Again, that's where you run into challenges where the client states, I actually didn't approve this. Maybe they verbally did. So you want to make sure there's a clear line of communication between your field team, your project manager, whoever is managing that field team, and ultimately your admin office, your operational office who's handling that actual physical change order that will go off to your customer. And you want to make sure that when you are creating these change orders, that not only is it a standard form, but there are the same people that are assigned to the same types of tasks throughout this function. So for example, again, maybe you have a field team and then there is a project manager. The project manager does X with this. He passes it on to whomever in maybe your AR person in the office, whoever this happens to be. Again, you want to have a process around this function so that things don't fall off, so that it's, oh, well, sometimes I give it to this person in the office. Sometimes it goes to that person. Well, this person does this with it and the other one does that with it. You want to create that consistency. So that's where your statements of work or your SOPs, as you would call them in your business, showing you how you actually do the things. They go from one person to the next to this and gets approved by this one and so on, so that you have consistency in this back office area so that all of your change orders go out consistently the same way to each client, through this the same way through each PM, and so on and so forth. So again, there's one person who's responsible for preparing and submitting the change orders, whether you do it daily, weekly, bi-weekly, monthly, however, when it is. Again, you have a statement, you have a process around that function, who's handling those things to ensure that your change orders are being handled the same customer to customer, and that there is no confusion about, number one, what the change order is, and then ultimately if it's been approved and whether the work can continue to go forward. So avoiding disputes, this is a really, really big problem. So you want to avoid disputes and you want to be clear with your communication. So what exactly does that mean? You want to do things like set expectations early with your clients. You want to stay proactive through the process. You don't want the owner or the project manager to be absent from the project. And you want to, and the last thing that we're going to talk about is you want to make sure that you look at you're always going to have a challenge with conflict. So what are the things that you could potentially do to minimize or eliminate that kind of conflict? And so what are some of those conflict prevention tips, right? So to help you out with avoiding disputes on your change orders. And again, you want to be very clear. And if your bidding, quoting process is clear, then your change order process should be clear as well. So first, you want to set expectations early with the client. You want to walk them through, and include your change order process in the original contract. So, for example, when you are walking through that original contract or you're having them approve that original, you should have some verbiage in there that states, hey, this is our change order process. Should this come up, this is what's going to happen. We won't move forward with any additional work until you approve, et cetera, et cetera. So you're setting the stage for what the expectations are really at the outset of the project. Not when the actual first change order comes through. It's actually, hey, it's actually maybe in the T's and C's of my contract with my client. Like, hey, this is the process. If we have a change order, this is what it is. This is what we're going to do. And then also, and even in that process, what the other thing you want to do is you want to explain to them how and when the changes will be documented, how and when they will be billed, like where that happens in that process too. So, how far into the actual completion of the change orders are you in fact going to invoice a client or expect to be paid? What kind of documentation are they going to receive with that change order? Are you having to actually provide some level of invoices to support that? Again, it's whatever you've agreed to, but you've been clear from the outset of the engagement as to what exactly it is that the client needs to do and what you will be doing on your side to ensure that this process doesn't have any hiccups. Again, a small change order, especially if there's a disagreement on it, can start to set the tone for what the rest of the engagement could in fact be like. So you want to make sure you get ahead of how you really set the tone with the client at the onset of the engagement and then maintain that consistency through the remainder of the engagement. You want to stay proactive with all of your customers. So again, you want to communicate with them if there are any proposed changes before the work begins. You don't want to start the work until honestly they've signed off on it, right? So you don't want to assume that some sort of verbal approval is good enough. It may not be. Your customer, your client may not remember that they had approved this change order or have an idea of what the change order revision was that they quote unquote approved, and your version of it and theirs are different. That's where you end up with disputes. So again, don't assume the verbal approval is actually approval to move forward with the work. Get it in writing and don't start the work until actually the client has signed off on it and has approved what it is that you've laid out as what the change order is. Some conflict prevention tips. Send updates and documentation regularly. One of the really great things that we're seeing in a lot of the project management systems now, from our side with working with our clients, is and many of them have a client facing side of the product. So client can potentially see that you, in fact, see the work that they're doing, right? Through their own client portal. So you can put updates in there as to where you are, how far into the scope that you've gotten to. So you're communicating with them, maybe verbally, regularly, at least maybe the project manager on site, but then also, the owner or again, that kind of senior person is sending updates potentially through some sort of client portal. Not everyone has this, but we're seeing it more and more with the project management systems our clients are using. So send an update to your client regularly as to kind of where you are in the project. What do you think is coming up? And again, any change orders that you may have discussed and how that will change the scope. So again, this is constant communication with the client as to kind of where you are with the process. And then always keep a paper trail of all your communications, whether it be emails or notes in the file after a phone call, text messages. Again, if you're communicating regularly with clients via text, you probably want to have some way of ensuring that those text messages get captured back into the client project or into that project management system somewhere as some sort of notes, as documentation to in fact support that. You want to ensure that the verbal approval that came from the client, which probably maybe came in a text message, again, that's not good enough. But you want to keep that in your records to say, well, we got this verbal approval. This is now the written approval that we need you to sign off on. So again, you want to keep your documentation. You want to kind of keep all your ducks in a row. You want to make sure that if you do need to grab it, that you can easily find it in your system somewhere. So again, this something simple like having processes around how you maintain notes and emails and texts is really vital to overall client relationships because again, now you have the information you need to support that. So there are going to be some tools that you're going to think about using for tracking your change orders, invoicing your change orders. Like anything else, you want this function to operate as efficiently as possible. Similar to the rest of your kind of invoicing process, you want this to go as smoothly as any other function of your the admin function of your business. So there are many digital solutions out there. There are tons of project management systems. I probably see a new one pop up on our radar almost every other day. So there are tons of products out there. Find the best project management platform that works for you. There are things like Builder Trend and Co-Construct and Procore and JobTread, and the list goes on and on and on. You want to find, as I've talked about on here before, you want to find the best tool that works most efficiently in the type of business you have. Just because your buddy who does this type of work over here uses this project management tool doesn't necessarily mean that's the best one for you. But a great way to be able to capture those change orders, track them, document them, send them off to the client would be through some sort of digital system. We're seeing also more and more with these project management systems that they have mobile apps attached to them. So we're seeing a little bit more on the field side where field teams are actually able to make notes in these mobile apps and then they go off ultimately to the project management system. So again, now we've got better documentation, clearer documentation. We're getting it a little bit more real time from the field so that it can in fact be kind of bundled up and created the job, your actual change order created by your admin staff and then ultimately go off to the client in a reasonable amount of time because now we're utilizing various pieces of technology to kind of get that info from the site to the admin and then off to the client in a reasonable amount of time instead of, within a couple of days or a week versus 3, 4, 8 weeks down the road. Now we're sending out the documentation for change orders, work is stopped, etc. So again, if you have the ability, utilizing these project management systems, many of them have some level of a mobile app attached to them, really can help improve the overall efficiency of your internal admin team as well as your field team. Most of these products are going to be integrated in some way with your invoicing. If they themselves can't invoice, they usually do. But if they can't, most of these project management systems speak to some type of accounting system, whether it be a QuickBooks Online or some type of QuickBooks Desktop or Xero or whatever accounting system you're using. Most of those can be synced very easily. So whatever's living in your project management system can in fact be pulled into your invoicing system relatively easily. So again, you're just going to link your change orders to the billing cycles you already have. So you're not really changing anything there. These systems are just speaking to each other. As with any other types of invoicing, not just invoicing for change orders, you want to automate your reminders. You want to make sure that anything that's going out pending for approval or anything that's unpaid, all of these things have a specific set of reminders. They get reminded on X number of days, days between approvals, so on and so forth. Those are key and important functions of just your general invoicing system, not just invoicing for change orders. So you want to make sure if you are in fact invoicing change orders, if you do it every week, every other week, whatever it is, you have a standard process and you have a standard process to go back to your customer and remind them, hi, we have this invoice outstanding, status, what's the status for payment, so on. Again, and you can automate all of these things. Most of them can be done either automated through your project management system or through your actual invoicing system. So again, it takes kind of that manual aspect out of things, but those reminders are still going there so that your customer knows that they still need to pay you on those particular invoices. So nothing really changes with the invoicing function of your change orders. You're just folding that into your general invoicing process. And you always want to keep everyone, in the loop, from the customer to whomever in the field is physically doing the work, or the project manager who is managing that work, or the admin staff. You want to make sure that you're clear. Everyone is clear as to where you are and you're getting the information as real time as you can. That's part of the reason why these project management systems have become more and more important in more businesses now, more in these construction businesses, because there is potentially a client-facing portal, so something that the client can see. And then your field team and your project manager is utilizing that system. They're tracking their time in there. They're tracking their invoices. They're applying their invoices against certain budget lines. And then that flows up to the admin team, who in fact ultimately would be the one who sends out the invoices and then requests payment from the customer and so on. So you utilize the portals and the real-time tracking you have available in many of these products, because they will help keep all of the stakeholders involved in this process actually engaged and understand where you are. And if there are, again, a culmination of multiple change orders, or you do one at a time, or you do them in bulk, however it is that you do it, make sure that your client understands that there might be an accumulation of change orders, what the order amounts are. And you want to make sure, like anything else, like any other invoicing, you communicate with them regularly as to what those change orders are and what they will be coming, especially if you've chosen to, or you will be aggregating them together in some way. Maybe you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 change orders over a period. They're getting all of them at once versus kind of one at a time. So communicate with them that there is going to be some, cumulative change orders over a period, what the amount's going to be. And then again, what the process doesn't change, how you invoice and how you collect from them. It's just, instead of one change order at a time, maybe, we're going to wait until we have 2 or 3 change orders, but you've communicated this with them. So they understand there's an expectation that this will be coming. Again, it's all about communication with the client so that they're aware of where you are in this process. You're communicating internally with your team about it, and then you're communicating with the client too. So let's just talk about kind of some final tips. So some key takeaways for this topic. You want to document your change orders fast. You want to communicate them clearly with all of the stakeholders, the people in the field, the admin team in your business, as well as your customer. And you want to make sure that you're tracking these in an efficient manner. It's really the most important thing: communication and tracking. And if you have a consistent system in your business, it isn't that much different than anything else that you're tracking in your business. If any of you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. We always love to hear back from you. Feel free to follow us here on Facebook or on our YouTube channel. We are at the Construction CPA on all of our social networks. We look forward to seeing you here every week. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next week.